Hey guys, welcome to another ride in the Strugglebus, where every wheel is an empty triangle. On today's Strugglebus Basics, we're going to be going into a little bit more about influence. In our last video, we talked about various stones being played on lines and on various lines, and we did talk about influence there, but it was still kind of left vague, and so I wanted to give a more concrete example of that. And we have a game that I played recently that showcases that pretty well. Before we jump in, though, I have a little story. If you're not interested in the story, you can just skip ahead, but I thought it was interesting. Anyway, so this channel started with the Strugglebus Basics videos and, built up a good foundation for the channel. And then I eventually kind of started running out of ideas and transitioned over to the bus rides and the road rage videos that you guys are more used to. And part of that was a little bit of my laziness because the Strugglebus Basic videos, they take quite a bit more work to put together, to find good examples and figure out, what examples I want to go over and how I want to go over them. And it takes a little bit more time. And so I kind of fell into the rut of doing the easier videos. And so this was a video, going over the last video and talking about influence. That's something that I've been wanting to do for a while. I just haven't, every time I've had the time to do it, I sit down and either decide to play a game or just decide, now let's do a bus rides video because it's easier. But anyway, so one night recently I had time to sit down and make that video, and I sat down and I decided to play a game. Again, putting it off. But the game then ended up being a great example to go over influence and being consistent with your plan with that. And that is the game that we have here today. So while it was me being lazy, and procrastinating like I always do with these videos, I was happy to get this example out of it. And so I thought it was a pretty good sign that maybe I should actually get that video done. So anyway, with that little story out of the way, we now have this game in front of us. And so I want to go over it. And I would just want to focus on two main things, obviously, influence. And then the second thing that leads into that is being consistent with your plan, which is something I went over in the last video, but this is again a more concrete example of that. So this was played on KGS, where I am 1K. My opponent is also 1K this game. And I am black in this game. So starting things off, so we start with a 4-4, and my opponent instantly jumps in with the 3-3, so we know it's going to be a pretty interesting game. I decide to ignore that and extend, or take the other corner. White extends, I extend, white turns, I turn, white jumps, I jump. This is all pretty standard stuff. It is worth noting that I chose to play the 4th line stone here. So looking to take a little more influence with that. Continuing on, white takes to the other corner. I take this corner again with a 4-4 stone. My opponent's next move may surprise about 0 of you. He jumps into 3-3. And so here I decide to continue taking influence. And then my opponent plays the kind of the lesser variation. Typically, we expect our opponents to extend one more time, we extend one more time, and then they tanuki. In this case, what happens is when white makes this exchange, and then we play here, white connects and we fix. This fixes both cuts pretty well. So now white can't really target this cut as well as he could have before. White plays away, and now we have Sente. And, there's 2 big areas on this board. We've got our corner here and our opponent's corner here. We could have played something like F3, but I wanted to extend off of this corner, and I wanted to maintain my level of influence here. So I ended up playing another 4th line move. And I know some of you guys are going to see this and go, hey, Gabe, you are not following your Strugglebus Basics rule of balance your early 3rd and 4th line stones. And I know I'm not. This game, I was purposely making an effort to take influence. All rules are meant to be broken. They're still good guidelines, but I still stand by this decision. So anyway, so it is clear that we are looking to use influence this game, and our opponent is looking to get territory. So before we get any further, let's talk about what influence is and what influence isn't. So generally what we're looking for when we're building influence is we want to influence the rest of the game. We want to take control of the center of the board. We want to control all fights that happen. We want to strengthen our groups, and then we want to fight because we've got stones all over the board that are going to help with this fight. So looking at this, just looking at the top left corner, it's pretty clear that any fight that happens, this group isn't going to do anything. It's not going to be able to help in any meaningful way because it's completely surrounded by black stones. Meanwhile, black stones are certainly going to be able to help any nearby fights. And that is just like the perfect example of what influence is here, right? White managed to get territory, black managed to get influence. Both of these are considered even, right? This is a Joseki, so the territory that white gets is equal to the influence that black gets. But you can see how if a fight happens over here, black should be favored in that fight. And that is true on the bottom right, and that is true on the top right, and then obviously not true near this corner. But that is what we're looking for from influence. What we are not looking for from influence is marking my influence on the top left here. What we are not looking to do with this influence is turn this area into territory. That is not the goal of influence. So when we're balancing this, right, we're balancing territory versus influence. If we wanted the territory, then I wouldn't have played this variation, right? I could have gone back, and instead of doing this, I could have played the double Hane and done this variation where I retain the corner and I retain the territory. But that's not what I chose, right? I chose this variation. And so when white plays away, you're going to notice I'm not going to play a move like this because I'm not looking to turn this into territory. That's not the intent of this influence. So the other concepts we'll get into when we get into the examples. One thing that influence can do, though, conversely, after I just said that you're not going to get territory out of it, is it threatens larger territory. So by playing these fourth line stones, this threatens a very large side. The issue, of course, is white can play this at any point in time and the side just gets completely broken up. Or white can play something like this and the corner gets broken up, right? So this isn't my territory yet. But if white doesn't do anything to challenge us on this, it turns into a pretty big territory. But that's typically not going to happen as you get stronger and play against stronger players. So anyway, so moving on, my opponent does not play here. That's where I clicked. My opponent jumps in immediately here, which I thought was a little premature for this, considering how open the bottom is and how much wider this area is. But either way, this is what my opponent chose. And so I decided to connect underneath. And what's interesting, right, is, sometimes influence can transition into territory, as I just mentioned. And this is one of those cases where while I was looking to get influence and like to maintain that influence, if my opponent is going to give me fourth line territory by playing something like this, I am perfectly fine with that because, as we mentioned in the last video, fourth line stones are more efficient than fifth line stones. So as we're building up here, and my opponent is now the one getting influence, his influence is less efficient because it's on the fifth line as compared to my territory that's on the fourth line. So I am more than okay if my opponent goes this way. But that is not what my opponent did. My opponent did this variation. And so here, typically we're going to play this Atari, and then white has some options. White decided to Atari this stone. Now we can capture, but then white connects and things get broken up a little here. And so that is not what I was interested in. Instead, I wanted to completely take the outside. I wanted to be consistent with the decisions that I had made earlier in the game, saying, I want influence this game. And so I play here, knowing that if white tries to escape, that I can capture. And now I have a huge territory here, and white has this liability. So white cannot do that. White is forced to capture, and then we can play on top here. And this will maintain our influence, which originally is what we were looking to do. And you're going to notice that white's going to rip away all the territory here. But again, that territory wasn't mine to begin with because I played fourth line stones. I wanted influence all along. I wanted influence. I made that decision early in the game. So I'm not upset by the fact that my opponent has taken away all this potential, all these potential points that were there, because they weren't my focus at the beginning of this game. And so white connects, and then I descend to separate his two groups. So now he's got to do some extra work to get this group to live. And so that's what he does. He jumps, we jump, he tries to push the reblock. He extends, I extend, he extends, I hane. And so now he comes back to make a living shape. And so you can look at this and go, oh, we lost everything there. But again, that is not true. We have great influence here. And white got very few points. If we look at how many points white got, especially after we reduce, this is obviously not what happens in the game, but if we reduce and then reduce and then reduce, white has 1, 2, 3 points. And that just is not a lot at all, especially when they're giving us all of this influence. So white plays here and we have sensei. I'm going to, go through these next few moves a little quickly because it's not the focus of what we're looking at. I want to protect this cut. I want to protect it as efficiently as possible. So that's why we end up playing here. This also maintains more influence, but white pushes and then we push, white pushes, we push, and then white turns, we hane, white pushes, we push, because we want to maintain our influence. And so you can be looking at this and going again, like, wow, but look at all this territory that white is getting. And again, everything comes at a trade-off. We're getting great influence, but it comes at a cost of our opponent getting territory. Conversely, our opponent's getting territory, but it comes at a cost of us getting influence. So now that the stage has been set, it is up to us to use this influence correctly so that we can actually win this game. Now, looking at this, I do not know if you prefer to be white or black on this board. I definitely prefer to be black. My playstyle, I love using influence. The fact that this was kind of bad by white, getting surrounded for so few points here. We've got good potential in this corner, and we've got amazing potential in this center. So yes, white has all the points on this board so far because we haven't actually gotten any. I still prefer black. So I'm curious if you guys, as newer players, would be looking at this and going, I prefer to be white on this board. So let me know, looking at this, if this is a board you look at and go, yes, I prefer black on this, or no, I prefer white on this, because I'm curious where your thoughts are before and after this video. So moving on, our opponent plays here, pokes at our cuts, and so we protect our cuts. We want to be nice and solid. And then my opponent plays here. So now let's go over some other rules about influence, because again, looking at the first rule of it, we're not doing this to get territory. Okay, we are using this to get strength, and we want to use that strength to fight. Okay, to effectively do that, one of the big rules is to play away from strength. That's both your strength and your opponent's strength. But in this case, we're the ones who have strength on this board. So we want to make sure that we play away from that strength. So we want to play on this side because this is where all of our strength is. Also, looking at this, white looks like he's trying to peep this cut. But the issue is our corner is strong by itself, and this is obviously strong by itself. So we actually don't care about this cut. And so here we can attack this stone by playing something over here. Now, need to mention, this move is not very good, but it's consistent with the plan of using our influence to attack these stones. In hindsight, we probably should have just played this. This is just a larger move, but from using influence, this is a fine move to show the example of how can we use this influence. So looking at this, these two stones, if they try to run, they're going to be running to the left towards our other influence. And so what's nice about this is we can play aggressive moves because we have strength everywhere. We're not going to get in trouble. So white then tanukis. White's going to tanuki a lot. White's going to play very dynamically and jump all over the place for the next 15 moves. So the game's a little tricky to follow, but I'll go through it. So white attaches down here just to play out this sort of variation. This is fine. Nothing. Don't want to go over too much over that. And then white finishes. We have sensei. We finally go to do something with the corner here. And our opponent ignores this move to try to save this stone. But I think this area is larger. So I followed up and then white ignored again. The issue here is now white's trying to cut us, but we're the ones who have influence. So we can play the aggressive moves, because it doesn't matter if we get cut, because we're too strong everywhere. So, pretty easy response here. We're just going to block this stone. And then white comes back to the corner. Again, I mentioned white jumps around quite a lot, so we answer that. And now white comes back to the center. But again, plays a shape that can be cut. And this is exactly what we're looking for. We are looking for these kind of fights because we have so much strength on this board. So this should be a pretty easy move to consider. We did the push, and we would cut, except now our opponent, of course, jumps back to the corner. Again, he jumps all over the place. We respond a few times over here, and then we finally push through. If white had ever played here, totally fine with this cut. But white played a move that gave us some more timing, and so now we go and play this. And you'll notice as we're doing this that now this is turning into a ton of points. But that wasn't the intent at the beginning. This was a byproduct of our opponent playing a little too loose in an area where we had all the influence. Okay, and so we knew to play away from strength. We knew that to look at the cuts that our opponents leave behind, because we can cut those since we have so much strength nearby. White could play a move like this and cut us. So now everybody's cut. But we're so much stronger that it just doesn't matter, because white is surrounded by black stones. So this is not a problem at all. And this is the advantage you get when you have a lot of influence, is you can play these aggressive variations and know that you getting cut doesn't matter because they're the ones that are weaker. So moving on, again, I think we do end up finishing this over here. And I knew at this point that the game was pretty much over as long as anything drastic didn't happen, right? We took away white's last area of potential, and so now all white really has is the top left corner, the top right corner, the few points here, and whatever this turns into, while we've got the side, a fairly large corner, and then whatever this monstrous thing turns into. And so we continue on our merry way. This is, while I did say we don't want to turn this into points, this is, the biggest area on the board now, right? This is, white can extend to here, we can extend to here, and so this is what we did. And I want to stop the review here because I don't want this to get into a full game review. I don't want to go over the fight that then this turns into. We do end up winning this game very handily. White ended up also making a blunder at the end of the game, but it didn't matter. We were up by about 40 before white made that blunder. And so the reason that we won this game as easily as we did is because we were able to stay consistent with our plan, which from the beginning was, to get influence and to use that. And our opponent didn't really know how to handle our influence very well. Our opponent didn't handle this one very well. I would expect most 1K players to do a better job at reducing and handling this influence than our opponent did here. It's potential, it's possible that they weren't giving this their best effort, and that's fine. Not every game has to be 100%. But again, I would expect more, more resistance than we got in this one. But either way, I thought this was a great example to go over how I view influence and how I go about using it, because influence, first of all, is a fairly difficult concept to understand at the beginning, and then it's an even tougher thing to actually use. Influence is notoriously difficult for newer players to use, because if you slip up once and let your opponent live in there, now all of a sudden your shape is just broken apart, and all your potential, your entire plan was controlling the center. If you lose control of that center, then you lose the entirety of the game. And that can happen much faster than if you're trying to go for territory and you just mess up a little bit and, only get 6 points when you could have gotten 12 points there, right? Your mistakes tend to be smaller. But either way, that is where we're going to leave this one today. Thank you guys for coming out for another round of the Strugglebus, where every wheel is an empty triangle. Have a good one, guys.